Thank you. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman and Intelligence Committee member Mike Quigley, who, as you saw, squared off against Devin Nunes on Monday. Congressman Quigley, you've said that when you confronted Chairman Nunes, his mannerisms and expressions led you to believe he wasn't being candid. Can you describe how so?
Well, let me add to that. My first year of watching this investigation under Chairman Nunes's helm, you detailed his midnight run to the White House. I've also witnessed his unwillingness to sign subpoenas for key witnesses, his refusal to push us to make sure that witnesses who have refused to answer questions do so. So I think there's a long history leading up to that questioning. It's hard reading the transcript mannerisms. That's why juries don't read transcripts. I think if there was an audio or video combined, the American public would see a man who was clearly somewhat ruffled and not wanting to answer the question. The totality of circumstances led me to believe he wasn't being truthful, and as I continued to question, asking about staff, he began to refuse to answer that question at all.
And it's a question that, you know, as we saw, Sarah Sanders doesn't answer to Chris Cuomo, saying, well, look, I don't know, I just haven't asked that question, which is a pretty major question you would think if she wanted to ask, she would have asked. If you believe that Chairman Nunes or his staff was, in fact, working with the White House, because it was staffers who actually wrote this, what's next? I mean, is there anything to try to do to prove that?
I think, yeah. Well, look, I think that we have to look at the totality here. Also in that transcript, I pressed the chairman about having the intelligence agencies brief Congress on this, or at least tell us what their concerns are and check these memos. He said, I'm not going to have them come testify before us. We're investigating them. Well, that's a fact that was news to everyone else in the room. It's another example of the chairman's rogue, unilateral, stealth attempts to stymie this investigation, and that is breaking all the rules and the traditions and the customs. He is with a few staff, I think, acting as an agent of the White House, and has for an entire year. So all I can do is sound the alarm, ask the right questions, and make sure the American public know exactly what's going on. It is as important, I think, though, to conclude here. This is the President of the United States acting to defend himself legally and politically at the expense of our national security, and complicit in that is the Speaker of the House and Chairman Nunes.
I mean, he says, look, we're investigating, you know, we have oversight of the FBI, we're investigating them. As part of any investigation, wouldn't they actually want the FBI, wouldn't they want Christopher Wray to come and answer questions in front of them?
Oh, absolutely. And they would also want our memo released at the exact same time. But at that business meeting we're talking about that transcript, they voted against that on party lines. They didn't want anybody to come here and brief the entire Congress in executive session. They didn't want anybody a chance to have a long-term review of this and critique it. They didn't want a chance for redactions, which even the White House, I understand, is considering. So it's pretty clear that they wanted this out. They wanted transparency on a one-sided basis. And they did it with an extraordinarily flimsy memo, and I think the FBI was accurate in discussing the quality of that memo. I was a little more harsh as a former professor. I described it as a book report by a junior in high school at 1 o'clock at night, written at 1 o'clock at night, 2 Red Bulls under their belt, and they haven't read the book. As far as I know, only Mr. Gowdy on their side has read the underlying materials.
In Nunes' statement today, he said, quote, top officials used unverified information in a court document to fuel a counterintelligence investigation during an American political campaign. Have you seen any evidence to support that claim? I mean, you haven't seen the underlying evidence. Nunes himself, to your point, and I talked to Adam Schiff about this, he has not seen the underlying evidence.
Yeah, here's what I can say. This investigation began independently of the Steele dossier. That's as important a statement as I can make. If the minority memo is released and the public, or at least Congress, is allowed to read that, it is a more scholarly report with actual footnotes, which will point by point rebut every aspect of the 4-page majority memo. And I believe it will bolster the integrity of the entire investigation. But this is a rush to action. It is not a rush to judge this. It is instead of a deliberate attempt to judge the totality of circumstances. We'd like to see this under the light of day where members of Congress are allowed to do this. But instead, we rush some material which is basically a lie, and it's misleading, and it's inappropriate, and it hurts our national security, putting us all in an extraordinarily difficult position, destroying the trust in a relationship that is critical to keeping us safe between the intelligence agencies and Congress.
So let me just repeat that. You're saying you can say with complete accuracy that the so-called Steele dossier was not the basis for the FISA application?
What I'm saying is this investigation that began as a counterintelligence investigation began independently of the Steele dossier.
Congressman Quigley, appreciate it.